USA versus China, who will control the world? Imagine a world where two countries are competing for the same thing. Not just money. Not just territory. But influence. One country has the world's most powerful global military network, decades of military experience, a huge nuclear arsenal, advanced technology, and a network of powerful allies spread across the planet. The other has one of the world's largest economies, enormous industrial capacity, a rapidly modernizing military, a massive navy, advanced missile systems, and growing influence across Asia, Africa, Latin America, and beyond. These two countries are the United States and China. And their competition could define the next several decades of world history. But there is a question that keeps becoming more difficult to answer. If the United States and China entered a direct struggle for global influence, which country would have the advantage? Would America's military experience, global bases, technology, and alliances be enough? Or could China's industrial power, growing navy, missile forces, economic influence, and geographic position eventually challenge America's dominance? And perhaps the most important question is this: does controlling the world even mean controlling the battlefield? Because in the 21st century, power is no longer measured only by soldiers, tanks, and aircraft. Power means satellites, cyber networks, technology, economic influence, military alliances, trade routes, industrial capacity, and the ability to influence what other countries do. So to understand who could shape the future, we need to look beyond the headlines and compare the two powers piece by piece. Let's start with America. For decades, the United States has possessed something very few countries in history have ever achieved: global military reach. America does not simply have a powerful military inside its own military forces across oceans and operate thousands of miles away from home. American aircraft carriers can travel across the world's oceans. Long-range aircraft can cross continents. Nuclear submarines can remain hidden beneath the sea. Military transport aircraft can move personnel and equipment across enormous distances. And American forces can operate alongside allies in Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and other regions. This creates one of America's greatest strategic advantages. The United States does not have to fight alone. America has a network of formal alliances and security partnerships that stretches across much of the developed world. NATO connects the United States with European and North American allies. In the Indo-Pacific, Washington maintains important security relationships with countries including Japan, South Korea, Australia, and the Philippines. This means American power isn't simply about the weapons sitting inside American bases. It is also about access. It is about logistics. It is about intelligence. It is about military cooperation. And most importantly, it is about allies. But global military power requires something very simple: money. And here, the United States still has an enormous advantage. According to SIPRI's latest 2025 estimates, the United States spent approximately $954 billion on its military. China was the world's second-largest military spender, at approximately $336 billion. That means America's estimated military expenditure was nearly 3 times China's. But there is an important warning. Military spending does not automatically equal military capability. Spending more does not automatically mean winning more. Military effectiveness depends on training, technology, logistics, intelligence, leadership, readiness, geography, and many other factors. But enormous spending gives a country something extremely valuable: the ability to continuously develop new weapons, maintain aircraft, train personnel, build satellites, develop intelligence systems, invest in cyber warfare, and prepare for future conflicts. America has been doing this for decades. So if the United States has such a massive military advantage, why is China considered America's greatest long-term strategic competitor? The answer is simple. China is not standing still. China has spent decades transforming its military. Its navy has expanded dramatically. Its missile forces have become increasingly sophisticated. Its air force has modernized. Its space capabilities have grown. And China has invested heavily in technologies designed to make it increasingly difficult for an opposing military to operate near Chinese territory. This is especially important in the Indo-Pacific. Because geography matters. A lot. China is fighting on home territory. The United States would potentially have to project power across the enormous Pacific Ocean. China would be operating much closer to its own military infrastructure, industrial base, airfields, ports, and missile systems. That creates a fundamental difference. Now imagine the Pacific Ocean. It is enormous. And somewhere inside this enormous region sits the center of the US-China strategic competition. Taiwan. The South China Sea. Japan. The Philippines. Guam. And the major shipping routes connecting Asia with the rest of the world. China's military strategy increasingly focuses on controlling what happens close to its coastline and surrounding waters. America, meanwhile, wants to maintain freedom of navigation and preserve its alliances and military access throughout the Indo-Pacific. This creates a strategic collision. But neither country needs to invade the other to compete. They can compete through military exercises, naval deployments, air patrols, economic pressure, technology restrictions, cyber operations, diplomatic partnerships, and strategic alliances. The battlefield is already much larger than a comparisons is naval power. China has built a huge navy. Its shipbuilding industry gives it enormous production capacity. And China's naval modernization has become one of the most important developments in global military affairs. But America has a different advantage. Experience. The US Navy has operated globally for decades. Its carrier strike groups, submarines, aircraft, logistics systems, and allied operations have been developed around worldwide power projection. China's navy is becoming increasingly capable. But operating close to your own coastline is different from maintaining complex military operations thousands of miles away. That creates one of the central questions of the competition. Can China transform its growing military strength into sustained global power projection? Because building ships is one thing. Operating them effectively across the world is another. And then we come to one of China's most important military advantages. Missiles. China has invested heavily in conventional missile capabilities. The strategic purpose isn't necessarily to destroy the entire American military. It can be much more complicated. The goal can be to make the operating environment extremely dangerous for an opposing force. Imagine trying to send an aircraft carrier into a region where long-range missiles, submarines, aircraft, drones, satellites, and electronic warfare systems are all operating. The question isn't simply, can America destroy China? The question becomes, can America operate close enough to China to influence the outcome? That distinction is incredibly important. China doesn't need to become stronger than America everywhere. It may only need to become strong enough in strategically important regions to make American intervention extremely costly. And then there is the weapon that changes everything. Nuclear weapons. Both the United States and China possess nuclear arsenals. A completely different form of military power. A conventional war can theoretically be won. A nuclear war could become catastrophic for everyone involved. That means the United States and China aren't simply competing over who has the strongest army. They are also trying to prevent the competition from crossing a line that could produce unimaginable consequences. This is why deterrence matters. The purpose of nuclear weapons is not necessarily to use them. Their existence can be intended to convince an opponent that attacking directly could produce unacceptable consequences. And that creates one of the strangest realities of modern geopolitics. The strongest weapons may be the weapons both sides desperately hope never to use. But military power is only one side of the story. America has another enormous advantage. Alliances. If the United States faces a crisis in the Indo-Pacific, it doesn't necessarily have to act alone. Japan. South Korea, Australia, the Philippines, and other regional partners can all affect the strategic environment. China has partnerships and diplomatic relationships of its own. But America's formal alliance architecture is one of its most significant sources of global influence. This is why measuring military power only by counting tanks, ships, aircraft, or missiles can be misleading. A superpower isn't powerful only because of what it owns. It can also be powerful because of who is willing to stand beside it. But China has its own form of power. Economic power. China has become deeply integrated into global manufacturing and international trade. Its companies, infrastructure projects, supply chains, and investments connect it to countries around the world. China's Belt and Road Initiative has expanded its economic and infrastructure relationships across multiple regions. And this creates another form of influence. You don't always need a military base to gain strategic importance. Sometimes a port is enough. Sometimes a factory. Sometimes access to critical minerals. Sometimes a major trade relationship. And sometimes economic dependence can influence political decisions. This is what makes the US-China competition so complicated. It isn't simply American military power versus Chinese military power. It is American power versus Chinese power across multiple dimensions. And China is increasingly trying to project that power beyond its immediate neighborhood. In 2017, China established its first overseas military base in Djibouti. The location is strategically important because Djibouti sits near the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and major shipping routes connecting the Red Sea and Indian Ocean. This does not mean China suddenly has a global military network comparable to America's. It doesn't. But it demonstrates something important. China is learning how to project power beyond its borders. And that is exactly what Washington is watching. Because if China's economic reach continues expanding while its military gains the ability to protect Chinese interests farther from home, China's global influence could become much more difficult to contain. And then there is another battlefield. Technology. This may eventually become more important than traditional weapons. Artificial intelligence. Satellites. Cyber warfare. Drones. Quantum technologies. Semiconductors. Autonomous systems. Electronic warfare. Space-based technology. The country that dominates these technologies could gain enormous military advantages. Imagine a future battlefield where drones identify targets. Satellites provide real-time information. Artificial intelligence analyzes thousands of possible movements. Cyber operations attack communication networks. And autonomous systems operate faster than human decision-makers can react. In that world, technological leadership becomes competition over advanced semiconductor technology has become strategically important. Because the future military battlefield may depend less on who has the most soldiers, and more on who has the most intelligent machines. So now we can return to the original question. USA versus China. Who is stronger? The honest answer is, it depends where. And it depends on what kind of conflict we're talking about. If we're talking about global military reach, overseas alliances, long-established logistics, and worldwide operations, the United States retains enormous advantages. If we're talking about China's immediate neighborhood, especially the Western Pacific, China's geography, missile capabilities, military modernization, and growing naval strength could make the environment extremely difficult for the United States. If we're talking about nuclear weapons, neither side can realistically expect a normal military victory. And if we're talking about economic and technological influence, the competition becomes much more complicated. But if we're talking about the next 20 or 30 years, the answer becomes almost impossible to predict with certainty. Perhaps the biggest mistake is thinking this is simply a race to become the world's strongest country. The real competition is about something deeper. Who gets to shape the international system? Who writes the rules? Who controls critical technologies? Who protects major trade routes? Who influences developing countries? Who dominates strategic industries? Who has the strongest alliances? Who can project military power? And perhaps most importantly, who can convince other countries to follow them? Because global leadership isn't the same thing as military domination. A country can have the strongest military in the world and still struggle to control the political decisions of other nations. And a country can gain enormous influence without firing a single shot. There are several possible futures. So what happens next? In one scenario, the United States maintains its military advantage while China continues rising but never overtakes American global influence. In another, China becomes powerful enough to dominate its region while America remains the world's leading global military power. In a third scenario, the two countries enter a prolonged competition similar to the Cold War. They compete in technology, economics, military power, intelligence, space, diplomacy. But they avoid direct war. And then there is another possibility. The most dangerous one. A crisis could escalate faster than either side expects. A military accident. A confrontation at sea. A dangerous aircraft encounter. A crisis involving Taiwan. Or simply a miscalculation between two nuclear-armed powers. That is why this competition matters to the entire world. Because the question isn't simply, who wins? The question is, can both sides compete without turning competition into catastrophe? Maybe the future won't belong completely to America. And it may not belong completely to China. The world is becoming more multipolar. India is rising. European countries are strengthening their defense capabilities. Middle powers are becoming more strategically important. Technology is changing warfare. And economic influence is becoming just as important as military strength. The United States still possesses extraordinary global military capabilities. China is rapidly expanding its own. America has advantages China cannot easily erase. China has strengths America cannot simply ignore. And between them lies one of the most consequential strategic competitions of the 21st century. Because if these two superpowers can compete without going to war, the world may enter a new era of great power competition. But if they fail, the consequences won't belong only to America or China. They could affect the entire world. So perhaps the real question isn't. The real question is, who will control the world? Who will shape the world that comes next? And that future is still being decided.